started, my name is Jean Murphy. I'm one of the University of Florida Master Naturalist Program instructors. And with the Friends of Pinellas Master Naturalists, I'm one of the co-membership chairs. My husband, Brian Lane, is our other membership chairperson. And we also are the UF FMNP facilitators for the group. So we keep the current information coming from the University of Florida to the Friends of Pinellas Master Naturalist group. So thank you so much for joining us. We should be getting quite a few more people joining us as we go along, but we want to get started on time. And we have James Stevenson here with us, and he is an extension specialist with the University of Florida, IFAS. And he is located up at Brooker Creek Preserve, which is our largest preserve in Pinellas County, up on the northern end. And he teaches a lot of different information about the natural resources, conservation. He talks about plant identification. He focuses in a lot about things like lichen and fungi, entomology, ecology. And if you've ever attended maybe one of his ferns classes, you may know James from that. So we welcome James, and today he's going to be talking to us about kitchen botany. So thank you very much, James, for joining us this morning, and I'll let you go ahead and take it from here.
All right, thank you very much, Jean and Brian, for inviting me this morning. I'll go ahead and share the screen so we can get started with today's topic, which is kitchen botany. Everything's look good, Jean?
Yes, it does. It looks great.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Again, James Stevenson with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, the extension of the university here in Pinellas County. As Jean was mentioning, I work up here at Brooker Creek Preserve. I grew up in Pinellas County, so I'm a native. I went from high school to the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, where we experienced seasons, proper temperate seasons. And I fell even further into my love of nature and the outdoors, studying botany. I was given the opportunity to create my own major field of study. There wasn't a botany major offered, so I said, well, that's what I want to do. And they let me do it. From there, I was given the opportunity to work at a botanic garden, which is where plant nerds go to make money studying plants. And so I got an internship at the Botanic Gardens in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And from there, once you're in the Botanic Garden kind of mafia, you get to go all over the world. Once you're in a Botanic Garden, you are welcome with open arms in just about any botanic garden around the world, because everyone in botanic gardens are doing the same thing. They're studying plants, sharing that knowledge, facilitating the study of plants by curating, by looking after the living collections of those plants. So I've had quite a great experience and had hands-on experience with quite a lot of plants over my career. From North Carolina, I went to study even further at perhaps the world's botanic garden, Kew Gardens in London. So I got a job there for 3 years, working and studying in all the different parts of those 300 acres of gardens right in London, and was recruited then to work in the world's oldest botanic garden, the University of Oxford Botanic Garden. So I spent a few years, 5 years there, again, with the opportunity to visit other botanic gardens and study the flora all around the world. In Jerusalem, I spent a couple of months studying and working with the flora of the Middle East, the south of France, Germany, Spain. So quite a lot of traveling, but I was kind of homesick for February in Florida, and managed to come back and secure a position at our very own Florida Botanic Gardens right in Largo. At the time, the Botanic Gardens was a part of UF IFAS Extension. And so again, got caught up in the machinery of IFAS and have been retained with IFAS through all the changes that have happened in the past decade, ending up here at Brooker Creek Preserve. As Jean was mentioning, it's the largest preserve in Pinellas County. We're just shy of 9,000 acres. And so there's plenty of plants to study and interpret and teach people about. We are 50% upland, which, as you know, is the kind of drier plant communities, and 50% freshwater wetlands. We have a coastal marine preserve as well. Whedon Island Preserve is our sister preserve. They also have an environmental education center. Our centers are currently closed, of course, but the staff in both of our centers continue on our mission to extend research from the University of Florida by teaching, using the resources that we have, extending that research to the people right here in the county. So that's boring me. Let's get on to the good stuff. Let's get on to botany. And a lot of people are interested in plants, understandably so. Generally, when I teach classes on plant identification or various groups of plants, as Jean mentioned, classes on particular group like orchids, a class on ferns. So not just interesting facts about the group, but how you can recognize and identify them for yourself. I always ask, when people sign up for a class as obscure as something like lichen or ferns, why are you here? Why do you want to know more about this group of plants? And we get a wide range of responses. Some people want to know what you can eat, what plants you might find in places where you have permission to pick them, if you can eat them. Some people are particularly interested in medicinal attributes of various plants. So different people, and most people, I must say, just want to satisfy a natural curiosity. We all love nature. We all love spending time outdoors. We just want to know what we're seeing. So classes on botany tend to scare people off. People think that might be too much of a haul. So we created this class to bring people and plants closer together by underscoring what you already know through your lifetime of interacting with plants on your dinner plate, on your lunch plate, sometimes your breakfast plate. So the plants that we are already familiar with can teach us and help us understand the plant world writ large. So today we'll study plants, but we're going to study the things that we already know about, the plants that we interact with on a daily basis. So from a botanical point of view, plants are organized into various structures that are referred to as organs. Now, that's not an unfamiliar word. Just as animals have various organs that are collections of tissues, and those organs serve a particular function for the overall well-being of that organism, plants are no different. And plant bodies, the main organs that plants share in common are the roots, the stems, and the leaves. See, this isn't very hard. Not unfamiliar words. So the root system, the root as an organ, the stem as an organ, and the leaves as an organ. And humans have taken it upon themselves through selective breeding, which we're going to cover in depth today. We have taken wild plants and through selective breeding over long periods of time, we have enhanced for our own purposes, our own needs, our own desires, even our own folly, enhanced and enlarged and manipulated these various organs for our own nutrition. So let's work from the ground up, and we'll start with the roots and how humans have manipulated the root system of various plants and those roots that have ended up in our kitchens. Now, roots have some basic functions as organs to anchor plants in place. And the fact that plants are stuck still leads to some very important plant adaptations. Plants can't get up and run away if they're being eaten or attacked or otherwise impeded in their progress towards reproduction. So anchored to the ground most times, the roots facilitate that. The absorption of water and nutrients facilitated by the root system. And most importantly, when we talk about plants in the kitchen, roots can act as a storage organ. So plants have this fantastic ability, this magical ability to turn sunlight and air into carbohydrate, into starch, into sugars that the plants require for their life, and what animals depend on at the very basics. Plants provide the very base of most 99.999% of all living creatures depend on that ability of plants to turn sunlight and air into carbohydrates. And some of those carbohydrates, of course, can be stored. So we'll have a look at some of the various roots that humans have manipulated to enhance their storage capacity and thus provide humans with a ready source of carbohydrate nutrient. There's a little plant, little European plant, Raphanus, which would have been growing wild around Europe and the Middle East, that does have this ability to store carbohydrate in the roots. And Raphanus is a plant that grows for 2 years and then dies. And in the first year after germinating, this little plant grows leaves. Those leaves are presented to the sunlight, absorbing air, taking water through the roots, and doing that magic of turning air and sunlight into carbohydrates and storing them in the roots. So in the first year, this little plant, Raphanus, that we know as radish, is putting away lots of carbohydrate in its root system. First year, storing up. The second year, usually overwintering, so during the dry or the cold and dry season where growth slows down, that plant can slowly draw on those stored nutrients so that in the second year, with this wealth of carbohydrates stored up, the plant can then initiate flowering. And the flowering happens as a result of the plant drawing on that stored carbohydrate to produce very tall flower stalks, the flowers visited by pollinators, the pollinators facilitating the set of seed, and the seeds then falling to the ground, the original plant dying away, setting up that system of every year renewal of that particular species. So humans noticed this, these nice little storage organs called radish, and somebody sometime decided that that was a good thing to eat. Kind of arguable whether or not it's a nice thing, but it has obviously stood the test of time, and humans realized that drawing on this plant's ability to store its carbohydrate, humans could take advantage of that. And so this plant was cultivated, brought into cultivation. The seeds were actively stored, sowed, and the plants were stocked at the point of that first year of storing up all that nice carbohydrate. And humans would then consume those roots. No good for the plant. That's it for the plant. It's not going to go any further if people are eating the roots. And over time, humans found mutations within this particular species where the roots were larger. And those plants were selected and bred with one another so that through the centuries and eons, larger and larger and larger storage roots were produced and selected for so that humans would have a ready source of this carbohydrate. In more time, mutations were discovered and exploited that could produce these storage roots in a very short amount of time, so that radishes could be grown over and over and over and over again throughout the growing season. And if you've ever grown radishes, you know that you can have a crop in a matter of weeks and not the original year that it took the wild plant to produce the storage organ. So our very first botany excursion will be with the humble radish, this storage organ that humans have cultivated and selected for these storage organs. Another, the parsnip, in this case, Pastanaka. Again, sativa meaning cultivated. Pastanaka has wild relatives, but this one that has been brought into cultivation is now only known as Pastanaka sativa. This is a plant that would not, among most of our kitchen subjects that we're studying today, you can't go out into the wild and find this wild radish that looks like this big red and white blob. That's not something that can exist in the absence of human cultivation. Just like the parsnip, this is a huge underground storage organism, much, much, much more than the individual plant needs to fulfill its own requirements. It's put a lot of resources into storing up all this extra sugar and carbohydrate at humans' behest. So the humans have selected these mutations that create these oversized, unnaturally large storage organs for our own use. And another root, our next root, is the parsnip. And if you've had parsnips, you can really, really taste that sugar, those sugars that are stored, that are so important, were much more important for survival. Now they're just mainly used as a side dish. We don't depend on parsnips. We just enjoy them seasonally when they are around. Now, the spokes root, of course, would have to be the carrot, Daucus carota, and this is the same genus and species as its wild ancestor. This plant is considered the same as its wild ancestor, but through mutation, natural mutation, and human selection of those mutations, humans have took the larger of the roots and cross-pollinated them with some other plants that had large roots, and it just went on and on and on and on until we ended up with the super carrot that we know today. The original carrot can still be found in the wild, and you might actually be familiar with wild carrots. Here we have the wild carrot as it occurs day to day, year to year, ever since humans first encountered it. And this was the root that humans first fed on. That's all you get in the wild carrot. That's all the root that the carrot needs to live, to flower the following year and carry on its reproduction. This is wild carrot, Daucus carota. That's all. You might know it as Queen Anne's lace. Queen Anne's lace is the same species as the wild carrot. So the Queen Anne's lace, if you're familiar, doesn't grow here in Pinellas County, but if you've traveled on the eastern United States, this plant has been introduced. It's actually native to the Middle East, but it has naturalized in the United States and is a very common kind of field weed or field wildflower. So this is that plant expressing itself in the wild. Now, carrot has a very plastic genome. That means that these roots can occur, there are pigments within the carrot genome that can be expressed in the root um, in a variety of colors. And perhaps you've seen carrots, white carrots, purple carrots, orange carrots, black carrots, and so on. And humans have played with carrots to bring out these pigments that exist in the genome that are expressed by selection into these various cultivars. Um, and so you see that plasticity. The wild Queen Anne's lace, the wild carrot, originated here, kind of around the south end of the Caspian Sea. And the humans who lived around this area would have discovered for themselves this wild carrot. And again, went through the process of selective breeding and cultivation, and the favored carrot, the original carrots that were produced and cultivated in this area are now known as the Asian carrot, and they're purple. So the carrots from around the area of the South Caspian Sea and eastward into Asia, they trade and consume these purple carrots. The pigment in the eastern carrot is water soluble, like beets, another root vegetable. So the pigment that is has been selected by people for their favored carrot in the east is water soluble. So basically, using this vegetable in cooking, that pigment leaches out and kind of turns everything purple. But it's what's favored in the east, in the west, excuse me, in the far east. In the far east is the purple carrot. In the west, what we expect from a carrot is for it to be orange. And there's a really odd reason for the orange carrot to exist as it does. The orange carrot, as we know it, was manipulated by the Dutch. It was the Dutch that popularized this vegetable and created by selecting for plants that only had orange storage roots. They liked orange. Does anyone know why? The national color of the Netherlands is orange. So it's a patriotic vegetable, and that's the reason that we in the West expect and are used to orange carrots. Same species, just human manipulation into this starchy vegetable that is formed by the root of the Daucus carota, the Queen Anne's lace. The stem, moving up from the ground, we'll look at the stem. And actually, before we carry on, I noticed that we have some chat, so I'm going to go ahead and pause here and open the chat.
That was just me saying how cool that was.
Okay.
I had no idea about that. That is really neat.
That's what people do. I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of the selection that is done in our taking wild plants and manipulating them through selective breeding is just for our own folly. There's no nutritional difference between a purple and an orange carrot. Starch is starch. But for our own whimsy, these orange carrots were created, and it's what we expect today.
And do they taste different, James?
I don't think there's any difference in taste. I mean, because of the plasticity of this genome, not just color can be selected for. So traits like the amount of sugar that's expressed and stored as sugar and not another kind or configuration of carbohydrate, you can end up with sweeter tasting carrots because certain cultivars are selected for to have more of that detectable sugar. So there are all kinds of different things There are dozens of carrot cultivars, size, shape, color, all these different things can be manipulated. So as far as the taste, that would probably be more due to the sugar content. But a lot of times, of course, those sugars are just going to disappear in the cooking process anyway. So moving on up the plant, from the roots, we'll move into the stems. And stems are the areas of the active, uh, the metabolic processes that induce the growth of the plant through its lifetime. So it's where the flowers are produced in flowering plants. The flowers are, of course, the most important part that flowering plants produce because it's the method of reproduction. So stems facilitate the production of flowers. Stems also facilitate the production and presentation of the leaf tissue. And without leaves, the plants, of course, can't do the magic of photosynthesis, as we mentioned before, turning that sunlight and air into the sugars. And of course, the branches, which help the plant to get larger and larger and exponentially increase their photosynthetic surface. So the stems are also very malleable in human hands. And we'll have a look at some of the stems that have been manipulated by people into these edible structures that we depend on for our nutrition. Asparagus is just the newly emerging stem of a plant called Asparagus officinalis. See how scary Latin isn't? You already know the Latin name for asparagus. You call it by its Latin name, Asparagus officinalis, the official asparagus. Now, there are other species of asparagus, but it is this one that has been brought into cultivation because it met the needs better than any of its cousins. It met the human needs of taste, the ratio of starch to effort at getting at that starch. So if you have to chew more than you get credit for, it's probably not worth eating. There is an asparagus that a lot of us are unfortunate enough to have in our yards. The asparagus fern, there's the climbing asparagus fern and the asparagus fern landscape plant. Both are in the same genus Asparagus. If they were edible, I think they would be grown as food and not as landscape plants. Again, the trade-off probably isn't worth it. They have established themselves as weeds here in Central Florida. They're not ferns, they're flowering plants. They produce flowers and seeds, and the birds move them all over the place. But this officinalis is the one that humans grow for our own delight, as it were. So here we have the growing tips of Asparagus officinalis, and this is the part that's very, very tender. The tissues haven't hardened. They haven't hardened against the elements. They're still very soft and tender, and this is, of course, is what we eat. Those plants, if they're allowed to continue to grow, become very tough and fibrous as a defense against being eaten, because, of course, plants are having to defend themselves against, wild plants have to defend themselves against being eaten. You can see the stems here elongating. The little scales are where the side branches are going to appear. The leaves very airy, fern-like, which gives the landscape plants their common name. Asparagus is one of few vegetables that are perennial. That means they grow from the same roots year after year after year after decade. So the same field of asparagus can be harvested year after year. Now, it's the growing tips, the newly emerging tips, that we eat. So historically speaking, asparagus was very seasonal. In the northern hemisphere, this vegetable would only be available in the spring, because that would be when this temperate species was initiating its growth. After that, all you get is these woody, fibrous stems that arguably are inedible, So asparagus was very, very seasonal. Now that we have varying agricultural methods, asparagus is now available year round. Of course, we can take advantage of the fact that the southern hemisphere has their spring beginning around now. So asparagus is now coming in that's being grown in the southern hemisphere. So that's our first stem that humans have manipulated into this vegetable that we know as asparagus. When we discussed roots, I suppose a couple of folks might have been wondering, where is potato? Because potato is touted as the spokes root vegetable. Botanically speaking, the potato is stem tissue. Just because it grows underground, the lay people, which of course y'all aren't anymore because you're botanists as of 10:30 this morning, and you know now that even though they are formed underground, technically potatoes are stem tissue, and they are storage tissue, just like we saw in the radish. It's a place where the plant can store quite a lot of carbohydrate uh, underground, safe from predation and the elements, so that over the dry season or over the cold season, this plant can rest and lie dormant so that the following spring can initiate stem growth and flowering and reproduction. So here we have underground stem called a rhizome, and at various areas along the rhizome, these swellings occur that are called tubers, technically, and you've probably heard that word too. And on the tuber, on the underground stem, there are the buds that we mentioned when we talked about stems. Stems are the areas of that metabolic activity. Stems produce leaves, stems produce branches, and stems produce flowers. And the little buds along the surface of the potato represent those buds that are going to grow into next year's stems, branches, and eventually flowers. Don't lie, you all know this to be a fact. We've all had the potato in the salad crisper that got away from us. I know it's true. This is what happens when those buds initiate. They can't stand it any longer. We've been waiting forever. It's time to express ourselves as stem tissue, and we're going to produce these branches that are going to bring on next year's growth. And you can see the bud is producing the roots. You can see the little root hairs here. They're going to produce the roots. They're growing the stems, and you can see the little primordial leaves as well. So that's what makes the potato an underground stem and stem tissue. And again, potatoes have been manipulated into dozens and dozens and dozens of different cultivars, shapes, sizes, colors, textures, different concentrations of sugars. And so we've got potatoes for a wide variety of different uses, human uses. For the wild Solanum tuberosum, it was just a swelling of the stem underground to overwinter and come up in the following year. So this is a plant that has obviously been in cultivation for thousands of years, native to Central and South America. Let's talk about this poor thing. This weed was found throughout Europe historically, is now almost unknown in the wild. So this plant was brought into cultivation, and through whatever pressures, either over collection in the wild, habitat destruction for the wild plant, other ecological forces that would have normally made this plant kind of go extinct naturally. This plant is called Brassica Oloracia, the wild cabbage. And there are only a few known wild populations of this plant left. This plant was brought into cultivation thousands of years ago, and I'm going to spend quite a lot of time on what we have done to this poor thing for our own nutrition and folly, both. So Brassica Oloracia, the wild cabbage, you can see here growing, you can see the leaves. The stem is reduced to just a short little flat layer. It's not a tall stem at this point. It's got an underground storage root. It's got all the things. And the first abomination that people did to Brassica Oloracia was to select for plants that never flowered. Instead, they produced these thickened, shortened stems. Otherwise, they would have elongated and burst into bloom. But instead, these stems are hindered in their process. The stems begin storing up all these starches. The flowers closing in on themselves and becoming even more storage area into what is known as cauliflower. And this, yes, is something that people actually wanted to do. And they did this. And we have this wild Brassica Oloracia brought into cultivation. Mutations occurred. Those mutations were enhanced, accentuated, and we ended up with this plant that we know as cauliflower. And you might, looking down on a cauliflower, you might recognize that it produces the lack of chlorophyll. A lot of times the leaves are folded over this crown, this would-be inflorescence, to keep the sun from hitting it, because the plant's going to try and reproduce as best it can. Hiding it from the sun causes it to blanch, causes that blanching to delay or prevent the formation of thickened photosynthetic tissues. So we end up with this creature, this organism, this thing known as cauliflower. So our poor little Brassica Oloracia being turned into the head of cauliflower. Another mutation that was selected for and enhanced was the creation of a swollen stem. And in this case, the same plant with the same kind of leaves. You might recognize on very small scale the leaves of the cauliflower that we just saw. Here they are trying to emerge from these little stem buds. This is the vegetable that we know as kohlrabi. And so this is a mutation that was in the stem of Brassica Oloracia, where the starches are stored in the stem area. And humans have created this kohlrabi, again, as a vehicle for butter. If you've had kohlrabi, you know that's just about all it's good for. And it's very good for that. Another mutation among the wild Brassica Oloracia brings us broccoli. Broccoli, like cauliflower, and you can see the familial resemblance there. You can tell that these two things are related. Again, is a it's kind of how do I want to say this? It's taking what would have been the flowering stalk that little Brassica Oloracia just wants to flower and make seeds and carry on the genome. What humans have done is we've halted that process, slowed that process down, and encouraged the plant, instead of sending all of its nutrient into the flowers and the production of seed, into storing a lot of that starch in the flowering stem tissue. And before the flowers open, we harvest this broccoli and we consume the flower buds, all these little knobs of the little flower buds, ending that particular plant's reason for being, reproduction. So we go ahead and we eat all those flower buds and that nice stem tissue. Again, probably cultivated as a vehicle for butter. And we all know that eating more plants is better than not eating any plants at all. So let's make these things palatable. The flowering stem of wild Brassica Oloracia is probably inedible. We'll talk about this a little bit in a second, but think about a wild plant stuck to the ground, cannot get away from its aggressors. So plants have the ability not only to synthesize sugar, but to synthesize poisons and other compounds to make these structures inedible. And a plant certainly doesn't want its flower stalk to be eaten. So a plant, and in this case broccoli, or Brassica Oloracia in general, is going to sequester compounds in the flowering stem to make it inedible, so that it will be left alone, so that those plants can go ahead and initiate flowering and the reproduction of that plant. Humans, through selection and breeding and mutation, have overcome that and have selected for plants that have less and less and less and less of those defensive chemicals, until we end up with plants that have hardly any of those defensive chemicals left. Some people are sensitive to broccoli. Some people are sensitive to Brassica Oloracia and all of its cultivars, because some of those defensive chemicals can cause gastric distress. And so some of these cultivars of Brassica Oloracia are just avoided by the particularly sensitive. Now, we can do as much as we can to alter a plant's blueprint for survival, which includes germinating, growing, production of stems and leaves and root tissue, and eventually flower. We can halt that process by chopping off the flowering stalks and consuming those flowers, but eventually the plants are going to persist. And anyone who has attempted to grow broccoli, especially in Central Florida, knows that it doesn't take very much heat, humidity, or day length to cause broccoli to push through that edible phase and express what it wants to do, which is flower. And here we have a neglected broccoli plant in an experimental garden or a home garden, something like that, where it just can't help it anymore. It's gone ahead and initiated the flowering. All those tiny little flower buds have opened, and Brassica Oloracia belongs to a group of vegetables that it is kind of the spokes species for, because as we've seen so far, Brassica Oloracia has been turned into several vegetables that are known as the crucifers, because the flowers of this group, it's a botanical family, in fact, the cruciferae or the Brassicaceae, the brassicas, they're called the crucifers because their flowers have these 4 petals, like a cross. So they are the cross-bearing, the crucifers, the cruciferous vegetables. Cruciferous meaning cross-bearing. So that's, everyone okay? I know we talked a lot, I've talked a lot about roots, stems, and then we're picking on this poor little Brassica Oloracia. If everyone's cool, I'm going to have a sip of coffee and we'll carry on.
I think we're doing well.
Very good. So we'll move on then to leaves. And of course, leaves being an organ of the plant that is responsible for the solar collection, and it's the site of the primary site of photosynthesis, where sunlight and air are turned into sugar, are turned into carbohydrate. This all happens in the leaves. And so, of course, humans throughout our history have consumed plant leaves. Most herbivores consume leaves first. They're certainly the most abundant above ground tissue. They're certainly the most renewable above ground tissue. Plants can produce leaves continuously through the growing season, so those leaves can be replaced as they are consumed. And so humans and other animals consume quite a lot of plant leaves. But humans being humans, and being agrarian and bringing wild plants into cultivation and creating organisms that could never survive in the wild, have done some pretty crazy things to plant leaves. Crazy among them being this thing called cabbage. You cannot, you will not walk into the wild going foraging. You will never come across a cabbage. A cabbage is an anathema in nature. What humans have done to poor, look who it is. It's the same species. It's poor old Brassica Oloracia. Somewhere along the line, some environmental factor caused a population or even an individual Brassica Oloracia plant, instead of producing leaves and presenting them to the sunlight for solar collection and photosynthesis, those leaves instead folded in on themselves in a very unnatural and unsustainable way, and created this round globe of arguably edible leaf tissue. Again, the leaves that are formed on the inside of this cabbage are not exposed at all to the sunlight. Chlorophyll isn't initiated. The tough leaf tissue that's meant to be waterproof and insect proof. So all those folded up leaves on the inside are going to be very tender, very desirable for human consumption. So cabbage was created, was selected for as a mutation of Brassica Oloracia. Perhaps the closest to wild Brassica Oloracia are what are known as the greens. Collard greens, perhaps the most famous, if you will, or the most well-known Brassica Oloracia leaves that are consumed as close to the wild plant as you can get. It's very likely that you would encounter something that looks very much like collard greens in the wild. These are just the thick, fibrous, waterproof, insect-proof, weatherproof leaves that humans have figured out are not too toxic, are in fact edible, and can contribute to dietary necessity. So collard greens, or just greens, are the leaves of a Brassica Oloracia that was selected for a plant or for a strain of plants that produce the thinnest, the tenderest, the plants that have the least amount of those defensive chemicals, offensive chemicals, arguably, that are contained within those leaves, so making them palatable. A version of collard greens with a mutation that caused the leaves to crinkle up. That's all it's done. Just a mutation that caused the leaves to crinkle has created and been selected for a form of greens that we refer to as kale. Kale is just crinkly collard greens. Kale has somehow, and I have to say, it's not a bad thing, kale has now become known as some sort of miracle food. Kale's just been sitting there being kale for thousands and thousands of years, ever since it was first brought into cultivation and selected for in the area that's now known as Italy. It's just crinkly collard greens. But if people think that it's magic and that causes people to eat more of it, all the better. We're all for people eating plants. But now, as botanists, you know that it's simply a take on Brassica Oloracia. Eat broccoli, eat cabbage, eat greens, eat kale. It's the same plant. Also, a member of this poor Brassica Oloracia and all the crazy things that we've done to it. In this case, the creation of Brussels sprouts. Again, some people might argue that this should not be a food, but it is, and it has stood more or less the test of time. And this isn't baby cabbages. This isn't, these are not plants that were, that began life as the basal rosette of leaves that are folded in on themselves. This is a plant that when grown looks very much like its species, the Brassica Oloracia, very much like the greens as they grow naturally. But upon the initiation of that flowering stem, the stem gets to be about 1.5 meters tall and produces the flowers on top. And all along that stem, you'll remember very early on, the stem is where the leaves are produced, the stem is where the flowers are produced, the stem is also where the side branches are produced. And in this case, it was the side branches that mutated into these curled up little bunches that are now known as Brussels sprouts. And these were selected for, can be a source of quite a lot. One plant can produce a couple dozen of these little side shoots that are now coiled in on themselves, creating Brussels sprouts. A lot of the original cultivars retain those defensive chemicals, those offensive chemicals that, you know, the plant is producing just to at least slow down the assault on its leaf tissue. As a result, a lot of Brussels sprouts have the reputation for being really not very digestible. The plants that are in cultivation, the Brussels sprouts, and really at this point I should mention that almost all of the vegetable selections that have been made of these various species are cultivated today for their marketability. Yes, we want carrots that are the same size, shape, and color and sugar content, but from an agricultural perspective, they have to be marketable. They have to be able to be transported to market. So other factors have, over the centuries, been introduced into our modern produce section. And Brussels sprouts have to be tough enough, and they have to be long-lasting enough to travel from their field of origin to their point of purchase. And the crops, the selections of Brussels sprouts that met all those criteria were yucky. Yeah, yes, we could get Brussels sprouts, but the fact that they had to last for a month in a box without rotting, and they had to not bruise, somehow got muted. Apologies. Where was I? Brussels sprouts. Anyway, cultivars of our modern produce section have had to make it from field to purchase. And in the case of Brussels sprouts and some other crops, conditions have been bred in, have been selected for, that facilitate that journey from field to market. And so I was mentioning that a lot of Brussels sprouts that make it to market don't taste very good. In the past decade, selections have been made to improve upon, and that's actually a term that's used, improve cultivars of Brussels sprouts so that they can make it to market without spoiling. They can withstand being jostled about in the picking and processing, and yet they can taste good. And so modern Brussels sprouts, and again, I say within the past 10 years, Brussels sprouts have been improved upon. And if you've given up on Brussels sprouts because they were disgusting, try again, because today, thanks to selective breeding, they are less disgusting. Okay, let's leave Brassica Oloracia alone. That's enough. There are many more cultivars of Brassica Oloracia. Just wanted to give you an idea of just the kinds of things that can be done to a single species. And we'll look at lettuce, another leaf. Think about eat your leaves, eat your leafy greens. Lettuce certainly comes to mind. And lettuce is not related at all to Brassica Oloracia. Remember, Brassica Oloracia was a member of a plant family called the crucifers or the cruciferes, the Brassicaceae, the brassicas. Lettuce belongs to the sunflower family. So the thistles, the dandelions, sunflowers, daisies, ragweed, all these things. And here we have lettuce, wild lettuce, Lactuca sativa, flowering. And you might just be able to see the resemblance that it has to dandelion. This is a whole bunch of lettuce flowers. And lettuce, Lactuca has the root lacto, which of course means milk. Lactuca has a milky sap, which gave it its genus name. When bruised, the leaves exude this milky sap. Lettuce, Lactuca sativa, in its plasticity, has again been turned into all these crazy cultivars that could not ever survive in the wild. They would never survive to reproductive state. We have iceberg lettuce, we have bib lettuce, we have red leaf lettuce, Boston bib, all these things, all these cultivars of Lactuca sativa. The closest to the wild is a cultivar that's called romaine. So Lactuca sativa in the wild is going to resemble romaine. And I mentioned Lactuca sativa gets its name from that sap, that milky sap that it exudes. There are people who are allergic to romaine lettuce. They can eat all the other cultivars. They can't eat romaine because they are sensitive to that defensive chemical that lettuce produces to prevent its leaves from being consumed. Humans have selected for plants that produce less and less and less and eventually none of that defensive chemical so that we have the sweet iceberg lettuce that we know, romaine being closest to wild. Now, just like cabbage, there once was a lettuce seedling that had a particular mutation that caused the leaves to grow in and over themselves, to fold in and over themselves, a trait that would not lead to successful survival in the wild. And you can see all these leaves shielded from the sun. They're not going to become rough. They're not going to produce the defensive chemicals. They're not going to produce chlorophyll because they don't have access to sun. Nothing is instigating that production. And here you can see the stem. Eventually, like our broccoli, that stem is going to overcome and push up through all these folded up leaves. And again, a negligent farmer, this could happen very easily, especially in Central Florida. The lettuce bolt, they overcome all that infolding and initiate the flowering. And so we have the lettuce flowers bolting here. Moving on from lettuce, another leaf that's consumed in quantity would be celery. And of course, celery is referred to as celery stalks. You might think that that's a stem, but it's not. It's actually a leaf base. And here we have a botanical drawing of a celery plant. And you can see the stem producing leaves. And it's these leaves that we harvest and we eat the leaf petiole. We stop this plant from elongating and from initiating that flowering stem. We stop that and we chop them off and we eat these nice juicy leaf bases. Now, when celery does overcome its desire to bolt and flower, the celery flowers are these flat topped umbels of flowers. And flowering is what a plant has to do to reproduce. And as a result of flowering, of course, are seeds. And seeds would be the most important component of a flowering plant. Seeds do not want to be consumed. A plant does not want its leaves to be consumed. Consumption of seeds, chewing up of seeds, means that that seed is never going to germinate. That's it. Seeds are a place where plants put a lot of defensive chemicals. And celery seed, as you know, very aromatic, very rich, very concentrated in those defensive chemicals. A lot of seeds are brought into cultivation for their defensive chemicals, and we call them spices. Ground up seeds, humans have taken quite a liking to those defensive chemicals. All those poisons that the plants put into their seeds, humans have decided they like quite a lot, and they flavor our foods. And some of those poisons are antifungal, because fungus could shut down a seed and its germination. Some of those seeds, some of those defenses, those poisons that are put into seeds are antibacterial, because bacteria could attack. Humans have taken a lot of these plant poisons and used them for their own antifungal and their own antibacterial. And so a lot of spicy food was created by humans to preserve the food, to keep the bacteria from spoiling the food, to keep the fungus from spoiling the food. So a lot of spicy foods are associated with warmer climates. We do an entire class on spices. You can find a recording of that class here. We have a series called Florida Supernature, a variety of botanical and otherwise topics. I'm actually, Jean, going to have to pause right here. There's someone coming in the back door. If you want to just take it from here for about 5 seconds, I'll be right back.
Certainly, I'll be glad to. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat feature. I know when I was watching some of this, I was very surprised that, for example, a lot of the vegetables that I don't care for, that they are the same plant. You know, I knew that some of them related. I didn't realize how many of them are the same plant. So if there are any questions, anything like that, go ahead and put that in the chat feature. And I know that I've tried to grow some of these. Right now I've got a couple of celery plants that they are quite strong in their flavor. I think it's probably because I'm not a consistent waterer, and but we saved them from the tropical storm, so they are still continuing. But I was wondering if, for example, if I allow them to go to seed, because their stalks, sorry, their leaf petioles are a little bit strong. I wonder if the seeds, if I might be able to use those as a spice, or even to grow new ones. So I was wondering if like some of the seeds of these plants are actually true to form, because some plants aren't. I'm sure you probably know that. If you take a seed from some plants that you get in the fruit vegetable world from the grocers, or from your neighbor that has a plant that's bearing fruits and such, if you plant them it doesn't mean that they're going to be true to form. So you might get, for example, you might have a delicious tangerine tree, but then you plant those seeds and that might not be the same flavor as what the plant is that comes up because of grafting and such. So does anybody have any questions? Anything that you are wondering about? I don't see anything in the chat feature. Hope you're enjoying this. We do have additional programs coming up with the Friends of Pinellas Master Naturalists, and keep watching your emails and all for that, because we send those out as they come available. And I'm sure quite a few of you have joined us for like the Florida Panthers talk that we had. We had a NOAA speaker talking about hurricanes and flying in the hurricanes recently. So we do have a variety of topics, and we're so excited that you were able to join us on this Saturday. We hope you did okay with Hurricane Tropical Storm Ada. That was definitely a interesting experience this past week. So do we have any questions? I don't see any. So we do have an upcoming Master Naturalist program, and I'll talk about that in a second. Buddy's saying that James's presentation is incredible. Yeah, he has a wonderful way of sharing information and making you say, wow. So with the Master Naturalist Program, Dr. Main has recently created a new one, Invasive Plants, and it's Invasive Plants of Florida. So Brian and I, we're going to be teaching that coming up early in 2021. So with that program, there are three kind of main components, and one is about aquatic plants, and one's about land plants, and then one's just in general about invasive plants, and what the challenges are, and why are they a problem, why are they here, what can we do about it. And we're excited about teaching that, because definitely we need to, learn more about invasives and share that information, as well as it gives some good information about what can we do as individuals. And there'll also be a part where you're looking at some of the botany, kind of in a way what we're talking about today, and the parts of the plants, and how can you tell one from another for identification purposes. We don't want to go removing any of our natives thinking that they're invasives, right? So we have a couple of other questions on nutritional variability in the plants and its forms. Great question, Michael. Ellen's wondering about rhubarb. Oh, and why don't we see rhubarb in Florida stores? Rhubarb is so hard to come by, isn't it? So you can look, and sometimes you'll find some sorry stalks or probably leaves in the grocery stores. But for example, Brian's family, they have a tradition of rhubarb, kind of a side dish, a dessert that's just delicious. And it's hard finding rhubarb during the holidays. I make a rhubarb kind of a cobbler every holiday season too. And rhubarb, where we find it is at Publix, but that's definitely a plant that seems to prefer cooler weather. I remember we're living up in Michigan that we used to grow rhubarb in our garden, and it just grew beautifully. But down here, I would think that it's probably the heat, too hot for it. And we can ask James about that when he's able to come back. So, yay, James. We had a question about rhubarb. Why is rhubarb not as popular down here, and we don't see it in the stores? And
well, you nailed it, Jean. We have the wrong climate to grow it locally. It's extremely temperate. It is actually one of a few crops that are very, very close to their wild. It hasn't been tampered with very much at all. We humans liked it the way it was, liked the way they found it in the wild, and so there hasn't been a lot of manipulation done to that particular plant. And so we haven't, as humans, when I say we, haven't really instilled any, sort of survival characteristics that would have allowed for a larger scope of cultivation. If you overlay that with the fact, number one, the absence of the cultivars, number two, when humans kind of spread into the southeastern United States, couldn't grow this plant that they were familiar with from Europe, just gave up on it, decided to grow something else. And so it hasn't become part of the traditional produce of our, culture here in the Southeast US. And as people have now moved here from further north, there might be the desire to have access to this crop. But again, it doesn't grow locally. And it's one of those things, as I mentioned, it doesn't have a lot of the defense mechanisms that are dreamed up or mutated by humans. So the transport of that crop to market, the plant degenerates during that transportation process. We don't get a quality product at the end. So you've got that pressure and the lack of demand because of its absence within our cultural menu. So those two things probably act together to result in this kind of absence. I also heard there was a question on the differences in the nutritional levels of the different cultivars. And nutrition is difficult to study. It's difficult to feed one person one cultivar and another person another cultivar, and then somehow test and see how this person reacted on a nutritional level versus this person. We can't cut people up and dissolve them and figure out which cultivar did better than the other. It's just something that we can't do. Individuals differ. So nutrition is the botanist in me wants to say that nutrition is kind of woolly, but I don't mean that in a bad way. We can certainly measure levels of various phytochemicals, and we can make claims that this cultivar has higher levels of X, Y, or Z, but the study of how those phytochemicals X, Y, and Z actually demonstrably affect human systems is very, very complicated at best. So what's most important, and your message from UF IFAS, is just eat plants. The more plants you eat, the better. You're gonna get the phytochemicals. Go ahead and eat plants. I don't think that eating cultivar carrot A is going to be demonstrably different than eating carrot cultivar B enough to bother choosing one or the other. Just eat your carrots. I hope that's okay. Anyway, let's move on. Apologies for that unanticipated interruption. We'll crush on. We were talking about plant poisons. We were talking about how plants can create these defensive chemicals to prevent things like their seeds from being consumed. Humans have taken advantage of those poisons. They're literal poisons. They're antifungals, antibacterials, antimicrobials, to preserve food and also to make food, to our senses, taste better. Mentioned a class on spice science that covers just that. Other defensive chemicals can be found in other seeds that are known as grains. The seeds of grasses, and the grass family is a big family. Grass seeds in cultivation are known as grains. And of course, we have different cultivars of rice, corn, millet, all these grains, all these various grains. And some people are very allergic to certain defensive chemicals that the grasses put into their seeds to prevent them from being chewed up and eaten. And you might know someone who is particularly sensitive to grains. But still, of course, that nutrition that is concentrated in the seed to sustain the growing seedling to start the next generation, humans found that is a good source of carbohydrate for us and for our sustenance. And grains were the first of the cultivated crops by humans. So grains were first brought into cultivation, and slowly improvements were made, larger grains, higher yield, multiple crops being available, and so on. We were talking about leaves. Got sidetracked, sorry, got called away, sorry, but let's get back to a leaf that's called spinach. Spinach is not a lettuce relative, it's not a cabbage relative, it's another leaf that humans can derive nutrition from, no matter if it's the best nutrition ever, it's just plant nutrition, and go ahead and eat it. Spinacia Oloracia, again, Oloracia meaning cultivated. And humans have done their very, very best to make spinach more and more edible. Spinach is another one of these plants that produces defensive, offensive chemicals to prevent being eaten. In the case of spinach, it's oxalic acid. This plant sequesters oxalic acid into its leaves to turn it to kind of get the herbivores to slow down a little bit or stop. And if you've eaten raw spinach, you probably notice how your teeth get a little mealy, get a little squeaky. That's that oxalic acid. Again, you would have to eat an awful lot of spinach to have a deleterious effect. Go ahead and eat your spinach. Spinach is related to beetroot, other plants that are wind pollinated. They throw their pollen out into the wind and hope for the best. But again, it is a flowering plant, and those oxalic acid crystals are also sequestered into the flowering, the flowers, the flowering stalks, again, to prevent predation, because plants, of course, are stuck still. A leaf that grows underground, the onion. Onions, again, might be considered root vegetable because they are produced underground, but technically the onion bulb represents several layers of leaf tissue folded over on themselves, and that leaf tissue acts as the storage tissue that will sustain the flowering stalk that will then produce the flowers and the seeds for the next generation. There are lots and lots of wild onions. Allium is the genus for onion. It's also the genus for garlic. It's also the genus for leek. It's also the genus for shallot and chives, all these things. We're not exactly sure which one of those wild species was first brought into cultivation and turned into the variety of onion cultivars that we have today, but we do know that it's been cultivated for quite a long time, thousands of years. This plant's defense is quite sinister and quite clever. When the leaf tissue is bruised, when it's cut, when it's damaged in some way, when it is assaulted, there's a chemical that is immediately produced upon exposure to air. And it's however you say this, that's the chemical. And it is a chemical that is meant to become an aerosol, meant to become airborne, and affect the eyes of whatever it is that is assaulting it. And we all know about chopping onions, and we all know about this chemical, and we all know its effect on our eyeballs. That was supposed to make you stop. But instead, humans have soldiered on right through the assault on our eyes and olfactory system, and included lots of onion in our diet. I hope everyone's still okay. I think you are. We had a little unexpected break there. We're going to carry on and finish up with fruit, like you see behind me, a majority of. Here we have that picture of all of our fruits. Not all of our fruits, but a good selection of our fruits. Apples, 5 a day. Oranges, grapes, yummy fruits. Tomato, pepper. Yes, these are fruits. Here's our botany lesson on fruit. And we'll use a familiar fruit, the cherry. Here we have the cherry blossoms in our capital. We know that cherry is a fruit. I hope everyone's on the same page. The cherry is a fruit. Yes. Fruit is the result of a flower. The flowering plants produce fruit. Botanically speaking, the fruit is the result of a flowering event. Taking the cherry as an example, here we have a cross section through one cherry flower. And we have all these botanical words that are very, very highfalutin, but you all know petal. We all know that flowers have petals, but they also have these reproductive structures that are produced to attract the pollinator. The pollinator picks up pollen, you've heard of that word, from one plant and transfers it to another plant in an act known as pollination, depositing the pollen on another part of the flower called the stigma. The pollen then finds its way down into the ovary, not an unfamiliar word. Within the ovary, there is an egg cell called an ovule. See how much we have in common with plants? After pollination, fertilization of that egg, a fertilized egg then develops into a seed. And the seed is contained within a fruit. The fruit being a ripened ovary. Okay, let's see this in real life. We have our cherry flower. We have the petals attracting the pollinators. We have the pollen being produced here. A pollinator brings in some pollen from another plant and accidentally, not intentionally, deposits it upon the stigma of another flower. The pollen grows down into the ovary and fertilizes the egg, and the egg becomes the seed contained within a fruit, the ripened ovary. Once fertilization, pollination, and then fertilization take place, the ovary begins to grow and swell. All the other parts can fall away. We are done with the stamens. We are done with the petals. We're not advertising or depositing or sending anything out. Right now, the most important thing is to ripen that ovary, and inside the ovary, that egg, which is becoming the seed, which is the next generation. So the ovary swells and provides nutrition for that egg that's becoming the seed. And in many cases, that ovary tissue is also becoming some sort of dispersal mechanism to get that seed inside far away from the parent plant. So in the case of the cherry, that ovarian tissue is going to ripen and swell and fill up with sugar, becoming attractive to the dispersal mechanism that would be some kind of animal that would eat the ovary, leaving the seed inside intact. The animal's going to wander off, fly off, walk off, slither off, whatever it's going to do after consuming that ripened ovary with the ripe seed inside, and deposit that seed far away from the parent plant. That's how flowering plants work. They flower, the ovary takes over, ripens the seed inside the ovary, and the ovary facilitates some kind of dispersal. And fruits can be dry, they can be wet, they can be juicy, but the fruit that we know from our produce section are the juicy fruits. And there's a particular family of plants, the cherry included. The roses are flowering plants that produce, whose ovaries turn into that dispersal mechanism that facilitates the ovary actually being eaten, not the seed being eaten. Remember, plants don't want their seeds chewed up. But in this case, this family, the rose family, they do want their seeds swallowed. And that's facilitated by producing this ovarian tissue that invites an animal to swallow the ovary, swallow the seed, and then deposit the seed somewhere else. Another group of plants, the very, very poisonous Solanaceae, Solanum tuberosum, the potato. Remember, we met him a long time ago. Solanum lycopersicum is the tomato, and most of 90% of the plant is toxic. Don't eat my flowers, don't eat my leaves, don't eat my roots, don't mess with my stem, full of poison. But please have at this fruit. The ovary ripens around the little ovules, which become seeds upon fertilization, and becomes non-toxic, edible, the vehicle for having the seeds pass through a digestive system and end up somewhere else. And if you've grown tomatoes, you've all seen this, from flower bud to flowering event to the ripening of that central section of the flower, the ovary, into the fruit with the seeds inside. So of course, tomato is a fruit, as is eggplant with the seeds inside, as is pepper, also related. The tuber is not a fruit. The tuber is not a product of the flower. Of course, the tuber, remember, is a stem tissue, complete with its little buds, but these are all related to one another, being overwhelmingly toxic, except for the dispersal mechanism for the seeds. Another group of fruit, those ripened ovaries with the seeds inside, is the cucurbits. And the cucurbits, very popular right now, include the gourds, some of which are edible, some of which are best left on the front porch. The very thin-skinned cucurbits, we can actually eat the skin of the cucumber and the zucchini. All these different fruits, a sweet fruit characterized here by the different melons. Squash is a cucurbit. But we'll just look at this one fruit, cucumber. Cucumber is another one of these ancient fruits. Is an ancient plant, a plant that's been in cultivation for quite a long time. Again, we're not quite sure what wild plant was brought into cultivation and turned into the cucumber that we know today. The wild plant might be extinct. It might have been overcollected, or it might have encountered some sort of environmental factor that led to its natural extinction. But we now have cucumbers in various guises and cultivars. Again, this is a plant that doesn't want its unripened seeds consumed. It does produce a flesh that can be eaten. It does produce seeds that can withstand a journey through a digestive system and thus being deposited somewhere else. But before those seeds are ripe, this plant doesn't want its fruit eaten. So in the skin and in the flesh are substances that can cause gastrointestinal distress. Humans, of course, overcoming that, pushing through that, and selecting for those plants that have less to none of those defensive chemicals. We'll finish up with a banana, a fruit that is known to everyone. And it is a fruit. It is a ripened ovary. It is the product of a flowering event each banana is a ripened ovary, but where are the seeds? I thought a fruit was a ripened ovary with seeds inside. Well, here's humans at work again, taking a wild plant, genus Musa, species Musa acuminata. Here it is flowering away and producing fruit, ripened ovaries with the little petals still stuck to the tip, and forcing a hybrid between the two, taking pollen from one species and hammering it on to the stigma of a different species, something that normally does not happen in the wild. Forcing this and growing offspring until an individual was found, the result of this hybridization. The hybridization being an unnatural combination of genes that have no business really knowing each other. That unnatural combination of genes led to a mutation, because everything's going wrong when you force these two species genomes into the same place at the same time that aren't meant to be together. A mutation occurred between Musa acuminata and another Balbiziana. Here we see a fruit of a wild banana full of seeds, because that's what they're for. They're ripened ovaries with seeds inside to carry on the genome to make the next generation of Musa balbiziana. The mutation of the seedling of the hybrid between these two individuals had no seeds. Couldn't reproduce itself. Sterile. Yummy. And those mutations popped up again and again. And we ended up with various cultivars of sterile bananas. By forcing this hybrid, growing out the seeds of the hybrid, and discovering here's an individual that can produce fruit with no seeds. Let's make a lot of that. And so we have these various cultivars of banana. Now, I mentioned earlier that today's produce section is not there for, in the first instance, it's not there for our nutrition. Let's think about it. The produce section is there for the grocery store to make money. We are being provided produce in the produce section so that we will trade our money for that produce. In order to provide produce for money, we have to, the retailer needs to provide produce that's desirable. It has to be consistent. It has to make it to market without getting squished and ugly, because nobody buys ugly things, produce. And it has to last a long time. So our modern produce has to meet those criteria before it's even available to us. And of all these wonderful cultivars of sterile bananas, just one mutation meets those requirements. Today, that one mutation is called the Cavendish. An individual plant was discovered that had sterile fruit, so no seeds to worry about, that was consistently the same size, consistently the same color, and survived the trip from the tropics to the grocery store. All those conditions were met. We have this one plant that has been cloned billions of times. One plant, one individual plant has been cloned, tissue cultured, artificially maintained, a single genome, no plasticity. Our Cavendish banana is not going to change because these are all the same plant, all producing the Cavendish. We're on our second banana. The first cultivar that was consistent, tough enough to make it to market, easily grown, was the Gross Michael. Billions of Gross Michael individuals were grown, but in the absence of any resistance to a disease, what you're looking at here on this banana plantation, all one plant was wiped out. There was no resistance. This one plant had no resistance, so the disease devastated that cultivar. Gross Michael, gone. So Cavendish was waiting in the wings, and now we have plantations of billions and billions and billions of individual plants that are all the same. Well, guess what? Yes, the same thing is happening now to Cavendish. And there's a fungus that is wreaking havoc on our Cavendish. And pesticides are being used to try and keep ahead of the march of this fungus. But it's getting to the point where more money and resources are being spent to try and stop the disease than the return on that investment is bringing back. So we are losing our current banana cultivar. Being stuck in our ways, humans are going to expect the next cultivar to be exactly like the Cavendish. People aren't going to buy an orange banana. That's just not natural. Or a red banana, or a small, short banana, or a green. No matter what it tastes like, people aren't going to fall for it. So that's why agriculture is trying to develop, cultivate, select for, choose, research the next cultivar of banana, because we're going to lose our Cavendish. So what do? Let's be a little experimental. Instead of waiting for the next cultivar, let's try one of these. Let's maybe reach out and think about a life after banana. There are plenty of fruits that can be grown in Florida. That means they can get to our markets without having to be shipped from the tropics. They don't have to withstand that test of being transportable. We can actually get access to these things grown right here in Florida. So push your boat out a little bit. Try some locally grown, locally available, something that you've never tried before. Do you know rambutan, available seasonally? It's very much like a lychee. I believe that's a lychee back there. It's got a big seed, but it's got a nice fleshy, sweetish flesh. Some people like to eat star fruit. More power to you. It's also available, can be grown locally, doesn't have to withstand that trip from the tropics. There are citrus that are showing immunity to the greening. They're not our Valencias, but there are other citrus that can be experimented with. Dragon fruit, and so on. Experiment with some locally sourced, support Florida agriculture as farmers try and pivot from growing, our cash crop, the orange, another fruit that's on the way out, and just perhaps, I know, a life without bananas, imagine that. Just prepare. I'm not promising that it's going to happen anytime soon, but just for now, push your boat out a little bit. Try some of these locally Florida-grown fruits and cultivars. So we'll finish up there. I just wanted to thank you. I've just had my kitchen redone. That's not true. This is from a magazine. This is someone who never cooks. So from my kitchen, my dream kitchen anyway, to yours, I want to thank you very much, Jean, Brian, the Friends of the Florida Master Naturalist, for having me today. hopefully drawing a line from you to the plant kingdom in a way that you can now appreciate what grows naturally. And do keep a lookout for some of our classes on plant identification coming up. We're doing everything virtually, just as Jean and Brian in Sensing Nature and Master Naturalists in general are doing. I have a question about kumquats. I think that kumquats are on the edge of citrus greening. They are closer to a wild, so they might be a little bit more sustainable. I personally only know kumquats as a weapon. I used to use them to throw at my sister because they were a readily available weapon, but apparently they are very delicious. You can eat the skin. So yeah, anything, keep your eyes on IFAS, the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. Lots of information on developing cultivars, support our Florida agriculture. And I think I've gone over, so apologies for that, Jean.
No problem. This was wonderful. We had a question. Do you do a talk on herbs?
I do not actually, on herbs in particular. The short answer is no. The only reason I say that is because there are plenty of extension professionals who do have very excellent classes on especially how to grow herbs. That's not something that I know. So I tend to avoid, I don't grow things. I observe them in the wild. But we did notice there was a gap in information about spices. And I do know something about this phytochemistry. So that's why we developed the spice class and left the herbs to the horticultural group.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions? I know a lot of people were saying how much they've really enjoyed the program and everything. So thank you very, very much. We are going to put this on YouTube. And I did put in the chat feature our link to the Friends of Pinellas Master Naturalist YouTube channel. So be sure to copy that and save that as a favorite so that you can watch those other programs that are coming up, or the past programs actually. If you want to see this program again, like I do, be sure and follow the YouTube channel, and that way you'll be able to watch it again and absorb some more of this great information. It was definitely a lot of wonderful information, James. Thank you. And putting the pieces together, you do that very masterfully. So thank you very much for that. I think it seems that there aren't any other questions. So again, thank you, James, and thank you everybody for joining us on this lovely Saturday morning on behalf of the Friends of Pinellas Master Naturalist Program. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.